In episode 59 of Mobycast, Jon and Chris break down Bret Fisher's Dockercon 2019 session, which was titled Node.js Rocks and Docker for Dev and Ops. Welcome to Mobycast, a weekly conversation about cloud-native development, AWS, and building distributed systems. Let's jump right in.
Welcome, Chris and Rich. It's another episode of Mobycast.
Hey guys, good to be back.
Hey, so Chris, I haven't talked to you since you went to Dockercon, and I've been curious to find out how it went.
Yes, Dockercon.
You're fresh back today, right?
Yes, I got back late last night from beautiful San Francisco, and this was Dockercon 4 for me, 4th year in a row. And it's been interesting to see how it's evolved over the years and changed and whatnot. So, but same basic format, 2 full days of content and sessions. And then the last day, 3rd day, was kind of a repeat of some of the more popular breakout sessions, as well as new this year were the open source summits, which is actually it was definitely kind of an interesting thing. And I wasn't able to participate in any of those or attend them just because of the timing, but it's a good addition, I think, to the conference.
Cool. So let's just get right to it. On a scale of I will never go back to best conference ever, where did this one land?
That's a tough one because so from a personal standpoint, this probably is my last Dockercon, just because after 4, I think it's kind of reached the saturation point. There's not a lot of new enough innovation and enough new things happening to Docker itself. And so the return on just learnings there for someone that's more experienced with it becomes less and less each year. The return becomes less and less. And I think this is absolutely true across the board for Dockercon attendees. Every year they always ask, hey, raise your hand if this is your first Dockercon. And it's well over half the audience shoots up their hand, right? So I do think Dockercon in particular is definitely one of those conferences where the need to go every year becomes less and less, as opposed to something like reInvent, where we've talked about that pace of innovation is just relentless, and there's just so much going on there. There's so much to learn that it's almost like you have to go each time just to try to keep up with what's going on. So from that standpoint, I think this was probably my last Dockercon, but I'm glad I went.
Docker getting old and long in the tooth.
How about a very mature and robust technology?
There we go. Yeah, I think it might be worth you sharing a couple. Why don't you just share a couple of your takeaways from how the keynotes were, or the keynote, and then just maybe a couple of sessions, and then we can maybe dive in. What we want to do this episode is we want to dive into one of the better sessions that I think is useful for our audience and for people that also are developers at our company. So yeah, just very maybe 1 minute overview on a few sessions, and then we'll start diving into one that we liked.
All right, yeah, get the stopwatch out.
Yeah.
So in general, something that really stuck out is this felt much smaller this year. So in previous years, I think last year and the year before at Austin, the numbers were about 5,000 for attendees, and I was seeing numbers around 3,000 in some of the emails that they were sending out from the Docker folks. And I mean, that's a big difference to go from 5 to 3. And it definitely felt smaller. And that has pluses and advantages too, right? It makes it really easy to get into reInvent, there's so much FOMO going on. I'm am I going to get any sessions and battle people out for it, versus Dockercon is just chill. Docker and chill. You're not going to have any problem getting into a session. So I had you don't have to pre-register, nothing. It's just so simple, right? You just walk in and no big deal. So that was a kind of a big difference. It kind of, we talked about this with last year's session, with the changeover from Ben and Solomon now to Steve Singh running Docker. And I think, Docker focusing more on what's their business model and really kind of becoming a business, not just a technology, seeing more and more of that focus. And it just kind of has more and more of that feel of this is about the enterprise. It's about business, it's about making money. And so kind of
Like, to me, that feels like it would go like it feels sort of yucky. Like it goes from a 2-day celebration of innovation to a two-day infomercial.
it's definitely a different vibe for sure. Absolutely. And it is what it is, right? I mean, that's just kind of what they need right now. And
Right.
that's what they're focused on. So it is what it is. I thought it was interesting for whatever reason this year, like the theme kind of felt like it was all about stickers. And it's like, I mean, stickers are fine. I got a few on my laptop, more than a few on my laptop, but this was like everything. Like it was the big thing during the conference was do things to get stickers, right? Like go play around with one of their robots and you get a sticker, or you fill out the survey for the conference and you get a sticker. You go do something special at the conference party, you get a sticker, and they give you a sticker book to put your stickers in. It's just
It's just go to Dockercon next year.
It was kind of strange. I mean, in previous years, when I was in Seattle, for the keynote, on every chair they put an umbrella with Docker logo on it, right? This year you got this blank sticker book, which it literally was just like a little notebook. Like, I mean, it wasn't even a sticker. I mean, so kind of weird. I mean, I definitely would have preferred the umbrella as opposed to the notebook, but it is what it is. The keynotes this year kind of again followed the same kind of look and feel. For me, it was a little bit of again, the energy, the vibe wasn't there. There was a big chunk of time spent with a round table of Docker customers. So they had five different representatives from 5 companies up on the stage and spent about 20 minutes doing kind of like a round table discussion Q&A. And it was I would have preferred them, doing something else, I guess. The nicest way to say it. So
right, you get that many C-level people on a stage together in a panel, and it's just going to be a game of saying nothing but seeming important.
I know what they should have done. Should have passed out beers, and we should have played buzzword bingo and drink.
Right.
That would have been pretty interesting, maybe. But this was the first time ever I heard the term brownfield. So we've all heard of greenfield, right? Brownfield. Have you heard of this?
No, not outside of the sewage and sanitation.
Yeah. So, and you're not, so I had never heard this before. I heard other speakers there, they mentioned they hadn't heard it before as well. So apparently a new term, what it means, basically it's what you do when you have like a mixture of legacy and greenfield work. So that's brownfield, right? So decomposing your monolith, you have, your legacy app, and then you start building up some carving away functionality in the form of new microservices around it. That's brownfield.
Okay.
So something learned there. And a final kind of takeaways, I was kind of surprised at just how small the expo floor was. It was really, really small.
Interesting. Like that means companies didn't want to spend the money to be there. And does that mean that there are not that many companies, or that they, all like there's tons of companies and they just didn't feel the spend was worth it because their potential customers weren't there?
Yeah, I mean, and who knows? I mean, it's probably all of that and more. But I was kind of surprised. Like a lot of the companies that I remember being there last year were not here this year.
That there are fewer companies. Like you think about what companies are out there building stuff that's really all about the container, and new companies or the numbers of companies in the container sort of landscape. That probably peaked last year, or maybe even 2 years ago, and then started getting consolidated and lots of die off too.
Yeah, I mean, part of me thinks that like the market there is still the same players and maybe even some growth. So like in years past, there's been a lot of vendors there in the storage driver space, obviously in the monitoring, tracing, diagnostics area, hybrid OS vendors and the likes and whatnot. And all those folks are still out there and going strong. They just weren't there. Yeah, they just weren't there this year. So
wow.
Yeah, it was.
There's your answer.
It was kind of surprising. So
all right. So I actually don't think we should spend too much time talking about talks that we're not going to talk about. Let's just say that it isn't really exactly the first time I've talked to you since we went to Dockercon, and you went to a lot of talks that you're never going to get that time back in your life. But there were a couple good ones, and we'd like to break down talks here on Mobycast and really get into them and talk about them and sort of go, a level deeper than can when you're just sitting there and in the moment. So let's do that with one of your favorite talks from this past show.
Yeah. So I did attend a session from Bret Fisher, who's a longtime Docker captain and just very big in the longtime Docker community. Does a lot of training and online courses now on blogging, and like I said, Docker captain, just really, really active in the community. So he gave a talk all about Node.js and using that in Docker. So it's called Node.js Rocks in Docker for Dev and Ops. And so kind of like the high level description of this was just best practices for managing Node and JavaScript projects when developing, testing, and operating containers. So it's going to cover, the session covers local development of Node and JavaScript specific projects, and then also how to optimize Docker Desktop and Docker Compose configs for the best of all worlds with JavaScript and Docker. So given that, here at Kelsis, we're a heavy Node.js shop, and obviously we're a big Docker shop. It's like, this looks like a good session to go to.
And without knowing anything about the talk, just the name of it, Node.js Rocks in Docker for Dev and Ops, it's like, yeah, it does. It's kind of a perfect marriage, right? Node makes these little servers that die if any error happens. So having a infrastructural, if you will, way of spinning them back up and treating them as cattle seems kind of perfect for the exact type of solution that Node provides.
Yep, absolutely. So yeah, this was a very good, relevant, practical talk, and it was really just a hit list of like, here are some of the tips and tricks. Some of these are somewhat known, and then there was some kind of more detailed, nuanced gems as well. So pretty good session. So maybe just kind of, the overall outline for this was kind of, various topics around like how to, do Node in a Docker environment. And so some of the high level topics that was covered were, okay, what are some of the best practices for doing Docker files for Node? How do we do process management for containers with Node?
And that's right, Sean.
Yes.
What I was just making.
Yeah. Talk about like healthy shutdown. Like, how do you actually properly shut down Node with Docker, which is actually a very big gotcha. And then go into a bit about things like how do you, multi-stage Docker files and how you can use those for your various different environments. Also get into like some of the things we all should be doing, like security scanning and auditing. And then also wrapping up with some practical tips for dealing with the classic Node modules problem with NPM, and how, when that gets built, what it's getting, what platform it's getting built for, and kind of making sure that you're not running into problems, especially if you have volume mount shares, so you can do things like hot reloading for debugging and whatnot. So making sure your Node modules you don't get bit by that. And
I'm not familiar with that particular problem, but we'll get there. We'll get there when we get there at the end of our outline. And for everyone listening, this is definitely going to be a two-parter. So
absolutely, yeah. And then a little bit about health checks and how those fit into the whole scenario. So
cool.
That's the general outline. Yeah.
Yeah. So it starts with the Dockerfile and the best practices around that for Node.
Yes.
Set that up.
Yeah. So let's go into that. So starting off with that. Kind of like the first thing Bret touched on was just like, okay, first of all, let's talk about the base image. What base image should you use? And so, stick with the even numbered major releases of Node, right? So these are the ones that are going to be supported and have LTS. Node recently just released 12. So that's something definitely to
yes, I'm sorry, what does that stand for?
Long-term support.
Okay.
Yeah. So the odd ones won't have long-term support, but the even ones will. And I believe LTS is guaranteed something like 18 months or 2 years worth of support. And so stick to the even numbered major releases of Node. And then, I think we've definitely talked about this in the past. Don't use the latest tag. So be very explicit with what version you want of the actual image.
Okay, cool. cool.
Right. Yeah. This is the tag on the actual Docker image that you're using, right? So don't use latest. Instead, just pick the number that you want to use and use that, because with latest, you don't necessarily know what you're going to get. It's going to change out from underneath of you. We've also talked about the issue with caching. So if for whatever reason on your Docker host, if you have a latest, an image that's tagged latest and it's cached there on your local host and hasn't been reaped, that could mean that, you know, you're going to be using an old version of old version without really wanting that. So yeah, just don't use latest. Specify the version that you want.
Cool. Makes sense.
Hey there, this is Rich. Please pardon this quick interruption. We recently passed an internal milestone of 30,000 listens, and I wanted to take a moment to thank you for the support. I was also hoping to encourage you to head on over to iTunes to leave us a review. Positive feedback and constructive criticism are both incredibly important to us. So give us an idea of how we're doing, and we'll promise to keep publishing new episodes every week. Okay, let's dive back in.
Another, and this is actually something that probably has caught all. If you're using Node, and if you're using, you know, Docker with Node, you probably run into this, and that is if you're using one of the versions that's based on the Jessie distribution, you probably got bit by this issue where you could no longer build your Docker image when it went to go pull from the Debian repo for Jessie. It's not there anymore, and so. This is because, you know, Jessie is no longer supported by Debian, and so they archived it. So basically, don't use Jessie. Instead, switch to Stretch is the flavor that you should be looking for in the official Node distribution. So use Stretch, not Jessie. And then you're not going to, that will be a supported version. And so again, that's a pretty relatively new.
When it comes to Node, supported by whom? Like just various maintainers of Node or a company?
So, well, this is specifically Debian. So this is the,
okay.
So, you know, the Debian Linux distro, they have archived Jessie. They're the ones that were, Jessie is that flavor of Debian, and so they're just no longer supporting it.
Oh, okay.
Both Wheezy and Jessie have been archived. So what it means is you're not going to get any security patches on those, right? So it's kind of like the same thing with Node with LTS support, right? So if it's not an LTS version, if you're using one of those odd ones, well, then, you know, after 6 months, it's no longer going to get updated with you know, security, you know, CVEs that happen and whatnot. So it's just not supported anymore.
Got it.
Yeah. So use Stretch, and then he also talked a bit about, okay, you know, what about Alpine versus Slim? And I think we've talked about this in the past as well, about using Alpine for your images. Alpine's a lot of great things about it, and you'll hear a lot of people talk about Alpine and talk about the advantages of it. So it's very, very minimal base image. It's just stripped down to just what you absolutely need.
Okay.
From a software standpoint, right? So it's good for two reasons. One, it's good for just file size. So if you're concerned about file size, like Alpine, it's going to be very, very small. So like the full Node images are like almost a gig pulling in everything, versus Alpine is like 77 megs. Right. So it's a huge difference there. But not only that, regardless of the space, the other big advantage of it is just security and the breadth of it, or the surface area that you have to the cover. Right? So the more software you have, the more surface area you have, and the more possibilities that, hey, there's going to be something wrong here with security. I'm going to have there's just more that I have to protect. So the less software you have there, the less doorways into your code. So those two things, something to look at. The downsides of Alpine are just that it's much more difficult to work with, right? Like it's just not convenient. Everything is different on Alpine. Bash is not there by default, right?
Everything you want, you've got to add to it.
Yeah, like it's got its own package manager, totally different than apt-get or Yum. So it's going to be it's more difficult to work with, and also the CVE scans don't work so well with Alpine, and it's also because it is so minimal. Like it has its own compatibility issues, like. In particular, like recently there was a file watching issue with NodeMon, which is a popular package with Node to monitor file system changes so that you can hot reload your app. well, that wasn't working with Alpine, but fine with other distributions. So it's, again, minimal software, harder to configure. You're gonna more likely to run into these issues. But the reason why he went into this so much is just like, look, use Slim. Slim is actually pretty darn small. It's not too much bigger actually than Alpine. So in his example, he was talking about like for the official Node.js images, Slim is about 150 megabytes versus Alpine is 77, which is so much, 150 megabytes, still so much better than 1 gig, or 800 megabytes or whatnot. So 150 megabytes, it's totally reasonable. It's only like 75 megabytes more than Alpine. You kind of get a lot of the software that you're used to. So start off with Slim and just go with that. Make life a little bit easier. And unless you have a really compelling reason why you need to go to Alpine, start with Slim.
Cool. Interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. So we just have a couple more minutes, and I think we can get through one more point and finish out this Dockerfile best practices section.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so we talked a little bit about node modules and, dealing with that. And so this does become kind of more of an issue when you do have the volume mounts between your containers and your hosts. So when you're developing locally on your machine, for things like hot reloading or for just speed of development, sometimes you'll want to share that with the host and node modules with the host and your source. But the problem is that like if you are building for if your node app needs to run under a certain platform, which it does, right? Like it's going to be probably running under Linux. Like if you're running in AWS or Azure, some cloud or whatnot, probably going to be running on a Linux machine, right? Mm-hmm. So, and there are, some node modules definitely have native code, right? So when you do an npm install, it's going to go run to node zip to compile the native code, the C code, C++ code, whatever it may be, into object code, and it's going to be done for the platform that it's being run on. So if you were like running, working on a Mac on OS X and you're sharing your node modules and you run your npm install outside the container, Node.js going to be compiling against Mac OS. And then if that gets embedded into baked into your image, and now you go deploy your image out on AWS, like things are not going to go well.
Right. Yeah. That's
right?
Super interesting problem.
Yeah. So, he just definitely pointing this out, be careful with it. Definitely one of the things you should be doing is you should be adding node modules to your Docker ignore file. And so if you do that, you definitely don't have to worry about it.
Your Docker, just so I can't recall, your Docker ignore file is basically going to say, when you're putting this image into an image repository, don't bring this stuff with it?
It's when you're building an image. So when you're building the image, it says whenever you're adding files or copying files, I don't care what you say in the instruction, don't include these types of files.
Okay.
When you do it. So you can.
And when you say in the instructions, you're talking about in the Dockerfile instruction?
In the actual Dockerfile itself, right? So it's an add or it's a copy instruction in your Dockerfile. So whatever you're specifying there, the Docker ignore file will override that. So that if you said so typically your Docker ignore, you want to make sure something like .git is ignored, right? Because you don't want your Git repo to be part of your actual Docker image. So that's something you went there. And so node module should be there as well and protect against that for when you are building an image. Of course, you shouldn't be building your image on your local machine. You should be doing it in your CI system.
Yeah.
But again, you may or may not be doing that. So add it to your Docker ignore. And then wrapping up the Dockerfile best practices, the final thing discussed was just talking about security and principle of least privilege, and definitely switching over and using the node user to run your application. And so by default in Docker, if you don't change your user, you're going to be running as root. And obviously running as root, you have all the privilege in the world, and you shouldn't be doing that, right? Because you should be really operating from the principle of least privileges. You should only be using the privilege that you need, and root is way too powerful, and there's way too much stuff that can go wrong, and you're opening yourself up to security problems and vulnerabilities or whatnot. So all the node official images, they come in, they actually have built-in support for a user that's created already in the operating system for you called node. but it's up to you to enable it, right? And so you can do this in your Dockerfile really easily. Just use the user command to switch to the node user. Just do that. And it's going to, this may have some permissions access issues. You're going to have some gotchas along the way. So it's going to take a little bit more work just to tweak it and make sure that, you're using the right, like, directories have the right permissions and ownership and whatnot. So there's probably going to be a few more instructions that you need to do in there in your Dockerfile.
It's so much better to do that during the course of development than, at the end, you've got a working application, you're all done. And now it's like, you work for a bigger company, so they're going to put it through a security audit. And it's like, oh, you got to change this. That's not when you want to change that.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. So switch these, or don't run as root, run under a lesser privileged account like the built-in node account.
That's cool that they built that in and made it ready to go. Switch over, you're good to go.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you. Next week, we're going to talk a lot more about this talk because already, it's just already super, super useful stuff. And it's been a while since we've talked much about Docker. So it's kind of feels good to go back to our container roots on this podcast. So thank you.
Moby 101.
Exactly.
All right. See you guys.
Yeah. Thanks, Rich. Thanks, Chris. Bye-bye.
Bye. Well, dear listener, you made it to the end. We appreciate your time and invite you to continue the conversation with us online. This episode, along with show notes and other valuable resources, is available at mobycast.fm/59. If you have any questions or additional insights, we encourage you to leave us a comment there. Thank you, and we'll see you again next week.